Hey everyone, welcome back to our UIKit series. Today we're going to be taking a look at adding scroll view. You can see here I just have a random scroll view with some images in UIKit. So this is something that is used in so many apps, from forms, from being able to scroll through content. It really takes that phone screen and expands it to a whole new level and adds that user inclusivity. It's something that's really popular in apps. We're not only going to be tackling the vertical scroll, but also the horizontal scroll. And I'll even show you how you can kind of test things out on the storyboard. And then last but certainly not least, we will also be handling how to do it programmatically, although I find doing it in the storyboard seems to just be a whole lot easier. Without further ado, let's go ahead and dive on in. All right, I'm going to be starting a new Xcode project, but if you want to add this to your existing one, feel free to do so. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I'm on Storyboard, language Swift, and let's go ahead and create our project. So in our main storyboard here, where we have our blank canvas, let's go to our object library in the top right, and let's go ahead and add our scroll view to the program. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this kind of over our phone screen here. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I'd like it to occupy most of the phone screen space. And what we're going to do is we're going to add some constraints. So all the way in the bottom right, where we kind of have this little square with the lines coming off of it, we're going to add some new constraints. And we're going to set these all to be the number 0 for our scroll view. We go ahead and add all 4 of those constraints, and you'll notice we get a little caution error up here. No worries, we can handle that by going to the size inspector on the right. It might be hidden under this panel over here. And we're going to check the size inspector. It kind of looks like a triangle. And we're going to uncheck the content layout guides. You'll notice a little error does go away. Next, where we're going to be putting the content, we're going to need an UI view. So you can go ahead and just search UI view or scroll and find it. And this is essentially our empty view for our content to go. I'm also going to have this occupy basically our whole screen here. We're once again going to be adding constraints, and we're going to set everything once again to be 0. But this is what I feel is the most important step here. Before we add those constraints, we're going to check the height constraint, and we're going to set it to be larger than our screen. So in this case, we're going to about 759. We're going to make that number bigger because we want the scrolls, let's say this is our kind of phone screen here, we want the scroll to kind of go off of the screen so the users can move it up and down. So I'm going to set this to be 1200. You can experiment with any number, and you can always change this in the constraints later on. So let's go ahead and add those constraints. And you can see here, it looks a little scuffed, but we can actually scroll with either your mouse or your trackpad. You can actually scroll this content already, which is pretty cool. So now it's kind of embedded in that scroll view. We can move content up and down. The next thing I would suggest doing is selecting the view on the left side of the screen here, holding Control, and dragging it to this other top view, not the scroll view, but the view right up here under the view controller. And you're going to set it to be equal widths. You're going to hold Control again. We're going to set this to be equal heights. Next, I would select on the view controller, either by pressing this button here or selecting it on the kind of hierarchy, and also under our size inspector. Instead of fixed, I would set this to be freeform. And this is going to make scrolling and adding that scroll much easier. I would then click back on the view, and you can kind of see, you can use your kind of fingers there to scroll all the content. So now that our scroll's kind of been added, let's go ahead and add some assets. I'm just going to be adding 3 random images like you saw in the preview. If you want to go ahead and go through the view library, add like buttons, sliders, text fields, and things like that, feel free to do so. I find that images are just a very quick way of adding this content. And if you want to, I will also be posting these images in the description below if you want to replicate exactly what I'm doing in this example. Otherwise, feel empowered to add your own content. So in my assets catalog, I've added a cat, frog, and a picture of John Lennon looking so dapper. All right, in our main storyboard, let's go to our object library, and we could either add a UI image view. The cool thing about adding images is we can also just press on this image tab. We can drag and drop them in. And you can see our image is a little bit large here. So let's go ahead and scale this cat meme down some. And what you'll want to do, and as is good practice when working with UIKit, is you'll want to add constraints. So let's say I want to add 50 from the top, and then maybe, 62 on both sides, right? You can play around with these numbers, whatever makes sense for your app. The objects on the top should have the top, trailing, and leading constraints, so top, left, right, and only the last object or the thing on the bottom of your scroll view should have the bottom constraint. When working with images, I also highly recommend checking this aspect ratio. Otherwise, your image might warp, it might kind of appear off the screen, right? And we don't want that to happen. Let's go ahead and also add our image of the frog. But before we do that, let's go ahead and scroll down a little bit. All right, let's go ahead and add our frog. It's also a little bit large, so we can kind of shrink it here. Wonderful. And let's add the frog's constraints. So we can set this one to be 100, and maybe we just keep this at 45, 45. It's not our last object. Check that aspect ratio. So we're going to keep it kind of going. And then we're going to scroll down to the bottom where we're going to be adding our last asset, which is going to be this picture of John Legend. Shrink it down a little bit here. And this is where I'd recommend including that bottom kind of constraint. So I'm going to set this one to maybe be 20. And we can have these be 60 and 60 maybe. I'm not going to include the top constraint, but you can feel free to add as many constraints as you feel is necessary. Just for the bottom one, add it so it kind of knows where it should be stopping. Wonderful. And we should be good to go to test our app. You can also just kind of scroll through it on the storyboard here. Sometimes I find it's a little hard to do, so let's go ahead and run it in the simulator. Cool. And we can see we have the simulator. In order to kind of move, you'll want to press and hold and kind of drag up, just as if you were kind of using your finger on the phone. And we can see here we have the scroll view. It kind of has this bounce as well. So if we kind of get aggressive and kind of flick, we can see that kind of bounces. Just as note, if we click on the scroll view and go to the attributes inspector, we can even see that we can enable or disable the indicators. I find that these little indicators on the side are great to tell the user how much scroll they have left, that it's scrollable. If you enable paging, this will also give a smoother scroll for the user. And you can enable or disable this bounce as well, but we kind of have a working scroll view, which is really great. So currently this one is scrolling vertically, so I'm going to show you a quick example on how we can scroll horizontally. Let's go ahead and pause our app, and let's go to our object library once more, and we'll go to our view controller. Let's drag and drop this blank phone screen on, and we're going to basically be repeating the steps with one main difference, which is instead of increasing the height, we're going to be increasing the width. Now for this one, if you do want to not occupy the entirety of the screen and will have your horizontal be just like the top or the bottom, feel free to do that. But I'm just going to go ahead and set all of these constraints to be 0 on our scroll view, add all 4 of them, click on our size inspector, uncheck content layout guides, go to our object library, add a UI view, go ahead and pop this thing in there. We're going to set our constraints to all be 0 in this first tab, and now this time we're going to take the width. Right now it's 385. Let's make it larger than that. Let's try out 700. So we're going to have 0 in this top constraints, and for the width, we're going to set it to be 700. You can play around with this number, whatever makes sense for your app. Let's add those 5 constraints, and you can see already we kind of have our scrolling available from left to right. We can do the same thing as last time. On the hierarchy on the left, we'll control drag this view equal widths, equal heights. We can select this view controller to also be freeform. And now we can see we can kind of scroll our content. Let's go ahead and add those images again, or whatever different UI elements you want. So let's add our little cat meme here. And then we can scroll over. Let's shrink it down a little bit. Let's scroll over and let's add a picture of a frog. Also, definitely add constraints to these kind of objects found within the horizontal scroll as well. Otherwise, I'll kind of show you what can happen. Let's also click on our view controller, and we'll set it to be the initial view controller. So now when we boot it in the simulator, we'll be able to test the horizontal scroll instead. If this was a real app, make sure you're handling the segue navigation appropriately. All right, cool. We can see that we have our horizontal kind of scrolling here. Because I haven't set up the constraints, you can kind of see that the frog is kind of clipping off. But if we really want to, we can kind of drag it off the screen a little bit. So make sure you're always setting up those constraints just so all the elements that you're presenting to the user show. And we can see at the bottom of the screen here that we do have that kind of scroll bar appearing. So when you want to have horizontal scroll, make the width larger. If you want to have vertical scroll, make the height larger. And you should be good to go. This is the simplest way to get started with UI Scroll, and it's really great because so many apps use this. Now, if you are looking to do this more programmatically, I'd be happy to show you that as well. So I'm going to just add a new view controller. Let's go ahead and add that view controller to the scene here. We're going to go ahead and click on it. If you're just starting with a fresh view controller file, this should already be set up for you. And I'm going to set our class to be our view controller. I'm also going to take it off this first one that was created, just so we don't get any weird issues on the simulator. And then just ahead of time for testing purposes, let's go ahead and make sure that this is now the initial view controller. And you can tell which one is first by this kind of arrow on the left side of the screen here. Alrighty, with this new one selected, let's open up our assistant and we can see our view controller file. Now we're going to make sure that we're going to be establishing the view controller and like kind of content area, as well as calling upon some new functions in the view did load. So let's first establish our scroll view. So we'll say let scroll view equals UI scroll view. And we're going to add some empty brackets. And we're also going to add a content view. This is where our content is going to be showing. And this is going to equal a UI view also with empty brackets. Awesome. And then we're now going to be creating a function called setup scroll view. And we're going to be calling upon this in the view did load. So as the view kind of gets pushed onto the phone screen, this function is going to be called. And let's create that function next. So outside of that brace, we're going to create our setup scroll view, empty brackets, we'll add our brace. You can see that my Apple Intelligence really wants me to kind of add the sub view first. And this is going to be scroll view, or whatever you called this constant above. Then we need to turn off the auto sizing mask. So we're going to access our scroll view dot translates auto resizing mask into constraints. Definitely feel free to use the autofill on a lot of this code here. And then after that, we're going to add capital NS, capital L layout constraint dot activate. And within these brackets, we're going to add our square brackets because we're going to be adding a list or an array. Essentially going to be adding the constraints programmatically. We're going to have this equal to the phone screen size. So the way we can do this is scrollView.leading anchor. So that's the one coming from the left. Dot constraint equal to, I'm going to use that autofill, view.leading anchor. Outside of this, we're going to add a comma because we're adding a list of things. And you can see that my Apple Intelligence is encouraging me to do the top anchor. And look at that, it already knows what we have to do. So we need to do the leading, which is left, top, which is the top, bottom anchor from the bottom, and trailing anchor, which is to the right. So you can go ahead and add all of those. My Apple Intelligence did a great job. If you need to pause and add them, feel free to do so. We are now done with kind of adding the constraints to the scroll view. So now let's add a sub view, which is where our content's going to go. So we're going to do scroll view dot add sub view. And we're going to reference our content view that we've created. I'm going to go to the next line and we're going to add our auto translating to be off as well. So content view dot translate auto resizing mask equals false. We're going to add our NS layout constraint dot activate. We're going to include our square brackets for our constraints as well. Now, if we want to be smarter and save some time, go ahead and copy and paste all of these things here. But you'll be like, wait, we need to edit the constraints for the content view. I'm going to show you a really cool productivity hack. So select after the word scroll view here, right before the dot. And if you hold Control Shift on your keyboard and press after the next line, on all these scroll views, you'll see you now have 4 kind of options where you can edit the code. And like as you type or remove, it's actually going to add all of those at the same time, which is pretty cool. And instead of equal to the view, we're going to do the exact same thing. So Control Shift, see right after the view dot here? Look at that. We're going to remove view, and we're going to set this to be for the scroll view dot leading anchor, top anchor, right? Super easy productivity hack. So that's Control Shift and then select the next lines. You can edit multiple lines at once. Let's go ahead and add a comma after this bottom anchor, or whatever your last anchor that you created was, and we're going to add a content view dot width anchor. Okay, if you want to make a horizontal scroll, this is the number that has to be higher. I'm going to do a vertical scroll, so we're going to add a dot constraint equal to scroll view dot width anchor, comma. Once again, content view dot, now we're going to do height anchor dot constraint. And when you want the number to be larger or not match it, essentially, you're going to do equal to constant. And this is where we can put in our numbers. Let's do 1200 here, just like we did with the other example. And essentially, this is going to enable that scrolling, just like when we did it on the storyboard. Okay, we should be good to go, but we do need to populate the storyboard with some content. And if we're going to be doing it programmatically, let's just call this a function of add content. And we can go ahead and establish a label. So let label equals UI label. Let's update that label dot text. Let's have it say, hello, UIKit, I'm scrolling. Any message you want. Any elements you're going to be adding here, it's totally up to you. And let's align this to be the dot center. Now we'll add a content view dot add subview of our label. Let's go ahead and add our label constraints as well. All right, let's add our NS layout constraint as well. Dot activate our square brackets, and let's go ahead and add the label top anchor. So label dot top anchor dot constraint equal to. I'm going to select the equal to constant because I want to kind of push it from the top. So this is going to be based off the content view dot top anchor, and let's go ahead and push it 20 from the top. And let's also center it a little bit better. So we'll do the label dot center x anchor dot constraint equal to, let's have it equal to the content view dot center x anchor. So this should line it up in the middle based on the middle of the content view. Oh, and there should be a space after center on the equal sign there. Alrighty, and we'll be sure to, in our view to load, call our function of load content. Alrighty, so let's go ahead. We can see that our preview here is blank, but when we do run the simulator, we should see a little bit of text, and we should be able to scroll up and down as well. Cool, we can see hello UIKit, I'm scrolling, and look, we can scroll it. We don't have any content below, so it's currently blank, but we can kind of see the text moving on the screen. We still have the bouncing, right? So this is how you can do it programmatically. I personally find just adding the storyboard, especially with UIKit, to be easier, but there's more than one way to do it, and it all comes down to preference in the end. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Let me know in the comments below what app you're creating that needs the scroll and UIKit. Otherwise, have a great day. Like, comment, subscribe, dream big, code bigger, and we'll see you in the next one.